We're almost on. Oh, we're live. Okay. Hi, Nick. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Thank you so much for having me, Grace.
I'm such a longtime fan of the Full Ratchet, and I feel like you are literally the OG of podcaster slash podcaster turned fund manager. You are, yeah, like one of the most like iconic people in my world. So, welcome to my show again.
Well, the key word in OG is old. So like you're the new face of venture, and I'm just, so pleased to be on the show. So thank you, Grace.
I want to go back a little bit on like, how you grew up and how you got to where you are. As a person who went to school in the Midwest, I went to U of I, University of Intervention Pitt. So I feel like
Amazing.
I'm just like I have a deep obsession with that area. I feel like people are a lot more um chill and like more connected to a degree. And why don't we start with like, how you grew up and like what lead you to tech?
Yeah, I think like the first 18 years of my life, I was focused on one thing, and it was a sport. So I had my head underwater for like 2 to 4 hours a day as a swimmer. And I chose my college because I wanted to be an Olympic athlete. And very quickly after getting to school in Indiana, I realized I was in over my head. And there was a lot of folks out there that were faster than me. It was sort of big fish, small pond when I was in high school, and the reverse when I got to college. And so I pivoted in venture speak and focused a little more on school and kind of found a new passion, obsession, which was business and entrepreneurship.
You have like, so I wonder like when it comes to coming into venture. So I believe you're like you're a person who created a main product at a company, and then later on you started angel investing, and you started like studying venture yourself throughout your podcast, and you literally started the first podcast in the VC industry. And I wonder what was the motivation back then, and like how did it get started? Because I feel like it's very popular podcast nowadays. Like it's kind of like a table stake for every VC firm. Everybody has a podcast. But when you started, like what was the scene like, and how hard was it to like convince like people to get on the show, since like it was like a new medium?
It was a lot easier than I expected. When I was just an individual angel investor reaching out to folks, I would never hear back. And all of a sudden, I show up with a microphone, and everyone was thrilled to come on the show and speak with me for an hour. So occasionally, I did get a no or a lack of response, but it was very rapid. And the audience grew rapidly at the time, before Substacks and Twitter. And like the big thing in the industry was Mattermark, the Mattermark Daily, and we get featured a lot, and the audience just jumped really quick. So we were really lucky. But why did I start it? It was just solving a problem. Early when I was trying to invest, I had no deal flow and I had no network, and I was experimenting with a variety of things to solve both of those problems. And fortunately, the network piece was solved quickly. I realized when you show up with one of these, I think we both have the same one.
Oh yeah, yeah.
When you show up with one of these, people are happy to talk with you. And so immediately I started building a network of tier one, Series A, and Series B VCs. And then over time, the audience continued to grow and grow. And all of a sudden, I was getting deal flow. I went from looking at 8 deals a month to 8 deals a day. And that's when the epiphany hit me that the best deal in Washington, D.C., that has no seed capital at the time, 2013, was way better than the middle of the pack deal from Stanford or YC. And that's where the thesis came from. So it wasn't even my own investment thesis. The thesis was given to me by my listeners.
Amazing. I wanted to ask, like, as a podcaster to podcaster. So since you started the Full Ratchet in like 2014, and your fund journey started in 2015, can you walk us like back on a little bit, like, how you kind of like turned the podcast into a fund back then?
100%. So you know this, but like VC is an archaic industry. Like it is so far behind other industries, even today, right? We invest in the most innovative, tech forward people out there, and our industry is terribly laggard. Like we're so far behind. and this is part of the reason why we've gotten traction with our LPs, because at New Stack, we're trying to build sort of a modern media presence, a modern tech presence, and a modern systems presence. But in the early days, I started this podcast. It solved the networking issue. It solved the deal flow issue. And fortunately, there was some innovation happening in the ecosystem. And the first thing to launch that I saw a big investment opportunity with was something called the AngelList Syndicate. So this is back in 2015. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the AngelList platform, but they launched something called syndicates. There was a handful of people doing it: Tim Ferriss, Jason Calacanis, Gil Pencina. And so we joined as one of the first syndicates. And I had this large audience of investors. So I said, hey, if you want to start looking at the deals that I invest in, join my group. And the group grew really fast, faster than we expected. And all of a sudden, I'm leading deals. Like that Washington, D.C. deal I mentioned before. I think we led that at maybe a 3 post. Now the company's worth, over 100 million. I won't say the exact amount, but and we were able to syndicate it and get people to invest alongside us. So over time, we built trust. We got really lucky with our first 10 deals. Knock on wood, that luck will continue. But when you have good luck early, that led to a pilot fund in 2018, and then more of a proper fund in 2020, 42.5 million. And it looks like we'll go out later this year and raise 150. So we're finally on our way.
I think it's super, I think you have done a couple of things that's very great. That is number one is your thesis is investing in outsiders. I think historically the money is very easily to be deployed within the Silicon Valley ecosystem, and you built a network that's outside of Silicon Valley, and also to a degree inside of Silicon Valley. I wonder, when you first started the podcast, what kind of deal were you getting, and then how do you kind of elevate the deal quality? Because I think I've chatted with a couple of friends who are in the LP world. I think they were saying for emerging managers to succeed in their zone, it's either the tier 1 investor wants to share their tier 1 deal with you, or your tier 1 deal will be passed on to the tier 1 investors. I've heard about you talking about early on. I believe this is early on when you were having a fund, you were trying to figure out instead of looking at the IPO landscape, we're just looking at who will be the lead investor, or the second round of investor that are tier 1 investors to coming to pick up the deals from us, or helping the startups that you invest in to figure out the strategy to get invested by the tier 1 investors. I wonder, how do you kind of make that happen? Because I feel that's one of the hardest thing. So it's easy to get deal flow, but hard to get the tier 1 deal flow.
Right. Well, I mean, the quantum unit of success in venture is the startup. You need to partner with the best founders in the best spaces, right? And the reason why our industry is so poor at what they do, and even the big names, the big brands, are trying to grind out 3x funds, which in my opinion is completely unacceptable for the risk profile. Just invest in the S&P. Everyone should be underwriting their fund at 10x. But the vast majority of our industry is selecting for the wrong things, right? I think it was Tony Conrad said, people think this is a skill industry, but it's an endurance game. It's not a skill game, it's an endurance game. Not only are our higher ed institutions terrible at selecting talent, but VCs are even worse. And they're typically selecting from a handful of schools and a handful of zip codes. You went to U of I in Urbana-Champaign. Mark Andreessen went there. Max Levchin went there. This is a great school. And the best of the best entrepreneur coming out of that school is going to outperform, the 50th percentile from the Ivy Leagues. But those are not the startups that are being selected. So ultimately, we've thought a lot about how do you select for the true tenacious, relentless dissenters that, are obsessive about the problem they're working on. And they're a true entrepreneur, not an anointed high pedigree tech founder. And because of that, we underwrite our funds to 10x plus, and we can also invest in a group of folks that aren't being chased, which I think is what a lot of folks miss when they launch a venture fund. They're all chasing the same targets. And when you're chasing a target, you can't diligence them appropriately, right? When they're the good-looking person at the dance, right, and they have a lot of suitors, you can't really get signal on what their quality is because everyone's chasing them. So if you bring a contrarian thesis, whether you invest in outsiders or deep tech or maybe women, if you bring a contrarian thesis, then you have an opportunity to execute a proper diligence process and select people for their true characteristics and the traits that make for outstanding entrepreneurs and outcomes, instead of just chasing around bright, shiny objects.
I wonder, I have a piggyback question on that. I feel like when you started, I feel like this thesis is very unproven, or like less of like the people who are chasing this. But nowadays, I feel like the emerging managers are basically tapping into every different angle. There's like the people who live in the Midwest, there's like the MBAs funds, and then there is the operator fund, there is the like basically underrepresented people fund. Basically, there's like a fund for every niche. So I wonder, in today's age, how do you kind of like stand out, or like what would be a thesis that you would go after if you are like starting a fund today?
Well, there are funds that are designed for every thesis, but that also assumes that the game we're playing is an access game. Which, if you ask a lot of prominent VCs in the Bay Area, what game are we playing? They're going to say it's an access game. I don't think this is an access game. I think if you hang a shingle and you say we're underrepresented minorities, or like Newstack, you say we invest in outsiders, or I just interviewed Larson Jensen on the show, right? He does a lot of defense tech and government oriented. If you hang a shingle, you're going to get a lot of deal flow in that space. But what's the key part of delivering outsized returns, Grace?
Fighting outside like basically outside companies.
Exactly. It's picking. You got to pick the outsized outcomes, right? It's not having 12,000 deals in your inbox that fit your thesis. It's picking the 10 that are going to be multi-billion-dollar companies. This is a picking game. This isn't an access game. Access gets you to the dance, but it doesn't get you the best outcome at the dance. So fundamentally, I believe it's a picking game. And no matter what your specialty is, you can beat everyone if you have a better apparatus for investing in the right assets.
How do you pick then? What's your insights on picking?
Well, okay. Have you ever hired someone, Grace?
I have hired freelancers and interns. Yeah.
Okay. And you probably start the process with interviews, right? And very quickly, there's a whole group of people you get answers you don't like, and you filter them out. The folks that you do get answers you like, before you make the hire, what do?
You test them. I guess. I don't know.
Them.
I test them.
And like a lot of folks will reference check, right? So you trust the response, but you verify, right?
Yeah.
Trust, but verify, right? So you'll do reference checks, or you look at their social proof online, right? If it's a freelancer, so you verify. The VC has one advantage that when we're investing in startups, that somebody who's interviewing a candidate for a job doesn't have. And that's observe. Not only can we trust the responses, verify the responses, but while we're doing diligence, let's say it's a month or 2 months or 3 months, we get to observe the way that these people behave. We get to observe the way these people act, right? How they interact with their co-founders and with their team, how they interact with a strategic partner like us. We can pressure test them and see how they respond to uncomfortable situations. So we have this huge advantage as an investor that somebody who's just hiring talent doesn't have. We actually get to put them in the role before we cut the check and see how they perform. And that's a huge advantage that we have at Newstack. There's a lot of characteristics that we're screening for. We're looking for certain extraordinary characteristics in people, and we get to observe that before we cut them a check. So, as long as we're doing our job, we know who we're partnering with.
I guess when you're observing them, what would you like? What are like the tactics to do to actually verify a company? Because I feel like it's easier to invest in like a long time friend or something because you know them a long time ago. But like for every deal that you invest in, like it won't be your longtime friend forever, right? So like I wonder, and then I feel like when the startups are showing you what they have done are typically along the things that you want to hear, but there's like definitely things that you don't see. I wonder how do you kind of like from like a technical perspective to do due diligence and or like slash observe them.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a great question. I think, you're not going to be able to replicate exactly how they're going to act in every high stakes situation for the duration of their startup, right? But there are proxies. You mentioned tactics. There are little tricks that you can use to see how they would act in a high stakes situation, right? So let's think downstream. How are they going to close a massive partner, especially as a teeny startup? Teeny startup with 5 people and a dog in a garage, with very limited revenue, closing a massive contract. Or a teeny startup, that's 3 months of burn away from cash out. How are they going to close a VP of sales from a huge company and convince them to join the startup? Right? They have to be really compelling. They have to handle those situations with care. They have to be able to close. And we have a variety of tactics we use to test their diligence, their tenacity, their responsiveness, their willingness to go above and beyond, right? I was just speaking with an entrepreneur the other day who was in Switzerland. He's based in Rhode Island, but he's building a banking startup in Switzerland. And I said, you know what? I know you're on a short timeline here, but we would love to meet in person before we make a commitment. And I don't know if we'll have time to meet in person in the next week. And he said, I'm on a flight tomorrow to Chicago. That's a signal to me that this guy will do whatever it takes in a high stakes, high profile situation to close the deal. That was a huge positive signal. Another tactic that we use is usually on a call with founders. We're going to ask them, do you have a pro forma financial model? Or do you have a cap table that represents your angel round or your pre-seed round? If they say yes, we will ask them to share that with us. That's a part of our diligence. We're going to have to look at that. 90% of founders either don't follow up, forget the deliverables, send the wrong thing. 90%. So immediately we pass, right? Ask me if like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or any of the great entrepreneurs forget to follow up with key deliverables. They don't forget, especially in a high stakes, important partner situation. They never forget to follow up, right? They make a note and they send it before the end of the day, right? They don't wait 3 days or a week. So these are like examples of tactics that, throughout the engagement, we're seeing if these entrepreneurs remember, they follow up, they go above and beyond, right? If we ask them for a 3-minute video pitching their startup so that I can share it with the team, so the whole team doesn't have to get on a call and we waste an hour of everyone's time, do they record a video? Is it compelling? Do they send it to us quickly? I've had entrepreneurs say, I'm too busy to record a video. How hard is it to pull out your iPhone and like hit record, turn the camera around and pitch your startup? If it's that hard, you're never going to close key talent. You're never going to close key customers, and you're not going to be able to close a tier 1 Series A.
I wonder, I think this is super great. And like, I really like that you actually share the tactics with us. And I wonder when it comes to like, since now you have like a $42.5 million fund, it's like very different than like if you're starting as an angel investor who write like tiny checks. So what if these like founders, they don't want to like deal with like the tiny check writers to give them, let's say like access to like their clients or whatever, like to do due diligence. Like how do you pull this off in like a smaller scale?
Every hire you make early in an organization and every investor you add to a cap table is a critical person. If you're not treating that with respect, if you're not diligent, if you're not following through and following up, then we don't want to participate. We started with teeny checks, right? In fund one, I was cutting 100K checks, then 200K checks. I was syndicating deals even before I had a fund. I had to convince founders, take my money, but I can't tell you when you're going to get the money, and I can't tell you how much it is, right? So it was my job to convince them, look, I'm one of you, right? I'm an entrepreneur too. I'm building a business. I will be your first call. I'll be your last call. I'll be the one that in the crucible will help you find the path forward always. And the best of the best entrepreneurs respect it. They don't say, oh, you're too small, I don't have time for you. And if they do, they're not right for us. They're not the best, in my opinion, or they're just not the right fit.
I wonder, when it comes to thinking about having a first fund to like fund 8, or like not fund 8, but like just in general, like fund 8 or like fund 10, fund 12 or whatever, when you're thinking about building a longevity of a fund, what's your thought process on creating an unfair advantage? I think you started out with like a really great network from the podcast, and like you were able to putting together like a cap table for maybe like helping the founder to putting together a cap table for like the future runs, which is like a great value add. And I think this is still like a really great things. And then later on, I feel like you develop your own fund strategy on, investing in outsiders from Silicon Valley. And I think those are great things. But to have longevity, to build a fund 8, I think there's like transformation need to be happen on each stage. What's your thought process on like, thinking about at what stage to do what, and like building up a very high moat to a degree to like, pulling this off?
I can tell you do a lot of these interviews because your insights are like spot on, Grace. Every venture fund out there has a thesis. Very few venture firms have a strategy. Okay, most VCs operate like money managers. They should be operating like startups. The winners of the future will look much more like a tech company and much less like a money manager. That's the simple response. If you're a venture fund that has a specialty thesis, we focus on this area, it's not going to be enough. You need a strategy. You need a sustainable competitive advantage. You said it, Grace. I mean, you said it very well. You can see the future. I can't tell you what your strategy should be. All I can tell you is if you're not thinking like a startup, and if you're not using technology or media or systems in some way to expand your advantage and make sure it's sustainable and defensible and you have a moat, you'll be out of business in 5 to 7 years. The one thing that the old brands have going for them in venture is tremendous inertia. There's a lot of big money managers out there at pensions and endowments who don't have incentives to make money. They have incentives to keep their job. And because of that, they will continue to invest in IBM stocks. Lyndall Eckman was on the show from Founder Group years ago, and he said the same thing. So there's tremendous inertia, but over time, even this asset class, as much as you may not believe it, even this asset class will innovate, and the dinosaurs will die, and the new entrants will look much more like startups and tech companies.
I love that. And I know that like I've heard you said this on other podcasts, you have a playbook on, you guys have like the talent training playbook. So you have a playbook for the maybe the like new grads or like undergrad people to come in, and then like you teach them how to source deals in their like location, and like how to build a pipeline, how to build an ecosystem within their area, all that kind of stuff. What other things do you have at like the new stack, and you kind of like build like a system around what you are building as a fund?
We build playbooks for everything. So we have 4 pillars: portfolio management, deal flow, capital, and brand. Each one of those has sub pillars and sub branches, and we've built playbooks for everything. So I could talk to you for hours about LP LPs and fundraising playbooks. I could talk to you about portfolio management playbooks. And as you mentioned, when it comes to interns and fellows and others that join the fund, we have a variety of playbooks and best practices and ways to try and accelerate learning curves, right? It's one thing for somebody to join our team and spend years with us and finally get the pattern recognition and finally understand what this industry is all about. It's far better if we can accelerate the learning curve and say, here are some great playbooks around sourcing. Here are the best practices and playbooks around selection, picking. Here are the playbooks around negotiating and closing deals. And so we try and build a playbook for everything in order to accelerate learning curves and make sure everyone we've trained goes out in the ecosystem and makes a huge impact in what they choose to do.
When it comes to building up your playbook, I feel like each person or each company's playbook should be like very different. Maybe it's not different. So I wonder, but like you have interviewed like a ton of amazing fund managers.
Yeah.
What would you say is like the core lessons that you've learned that you kind of infuse into your playbook?
Well, let's talk about fundraising specifically as an example.
You read my mind.
Okay. I think the biggest takeaway when it comes to fundraising is you have to know yourself, i.e. your product. You have to know your customer, and you have to fill top of funnel. It's really that simple. If you don't know yourself and your core product as a fund, what is your value proposition? What are you selling? How do you tell that story? If you can't do that, then you're dead on arrival. Fund managers also don't think about their ICP. Know your customer. Like, I don't hear many fund managers speaking like startups, right? They go to these pitch sessions. I go to these pitch sessions and they're flipping through slides in the deck. It's like, how many startup founders do you like it when they do that? When they show up and they flip through every slide and they read every slide. But it's amazing to me, like fund managers don't drink the same Kool-Aid that they're advising their startups on. So we all have to know who our ICP is. I know who my target LP is, and it's very different than like many of my counterparts that call on institutions. We don't pitch to many institutions. Institutions tend to like to check boxes. Are you a spinout from a large fund? Are you a crypto? There's a variety of boxes that they want to check, and usually we check none of them. And so they're not our ICP. And then finally, the third thing was filling top of funnel. You need, as a fund manager, you need to build a muscle in a machine around finding those ICP targets and filling top of funnel. And we have 3 playbooks on that. And so that's just an example of like, on the capital side, this is the way that we think about it. I can't claim that all these insights are my own. I mean, many of them I've received from guests over the years and brilliant hosts like yourself. And so that's been helpful.
I think you are so like, I feel like I wanted to just like be an observer of the industry. I feel like, it sounds like when you first started your current venture, you were angel investing, meaning you had money to like invest at least, right? So like, I wonder what was your financial situation like? Because yesterday I was chatting with a guest, so who are like working. So I was chatting with John Gannon. So he had like jobs throughout his career in building up his media empire, and like that's one way of like supporting yourself, supporting the family. And for like, it sounds like for you already have some financial success to, I know that you mentioned in other podcasts that you were the least paid person on your team, still like in the past couple of years. Like, so I wonder what was the financial situation like for you, and how do you kind of think about making some money while, running a fund? Because I think you had a really good first fund. So like from 6 million, you can turn it into a $42.5 million fund, right? But like, for many people, their first 3 funds are like 1 million, 3 million, 10 million, right?
Yeah.
So throughout that process, like your management fee is like very tiny. And how do you think through like the supporting yourself, supporting the family, supporting basically what you have to support at that point?
So the financial situation wasn't good. Everyone thinks I was rich. I wasn't. I cashed out my 401k. I sold both cars. We sold our house. We rented a 1-bedroom apartment, and I used my life savings to, make angel investments. I didn't take a paycheck for 4 years. So for 4 years, I had no salary. That's hard. Fortunately, I have a very understanding wife, very understanding and patient. She was willing to live in shitty 1-bedroom apartments for years in, above the L where it's noisy and everything rattles, in order for me to pursue my goals. But, you got to fake it to make it. And there were many years we didn't have revenue on the podcast. And as soon as we had revenue on the podcast, I hired an assistant. Roy from Bloomberg Beta gave me really good advice. Everyone wants to hire a partner to start. Most people need an assistant, somebody to help them. And I took the advice and it was really useful. So it took a long time to get going. I took a $100,000 loan at one point to get going. I never sold a piece of management company. It's what a lot of fund managers do to get started. They sell a piece of management company. It's kind of a big secret, but I would say the majority of my peers have done that to get started. If you sell a piece of management company and you get a few $100,000, that can get you going for a couple of years. You can hire some people, some real talent. It can get you going. And maybe I would have considered that, but I didn't even know that was like an option. People could do that. So it's hard. It's really hard to get going. I can't sit here and pretend that we were living a cush life and everything was great. Now things are better. We've purchased a beautiful home and, my son can do all the sports and the clubs and all that stuff. And it's great, but it took us 10 years. So I'm not going to BS you and say it was easy. It wasn't.
So basically, I should apply for a job at Google tomorrow. That's what life advice from this podcast.
Well, any founder that complains, about salaries and stuff, or complains about fundraising, it's like, look, I've been there. For Fund 1, I pitched 550 people. I got 42. For Fund 2, I think we pitched 600, and we got 135. I've gotten way more no's in this game than yeses. I've gone for over 48 months without a paycheck. I know what financial pain, can look like. And it's a matter of determination and finding the people that want to stick it through and find the path to success.
You want to hear something crazy? Honestly, you haven't pitched that many people to get your fund started. I feel like I've heard so many people, I feel like everybody pitch in the thousands to get their fund started. So honestly, the 500, 600 range was not bad. But I wonder, when you were thinking about your by the way, I feel like it's very I'm super glad that you're sharing this in the pod, because I feel like most people think it's such a glamorous job and it's so impressive that you raise a fund or something, but it's also so much hard work, and you have to go through so much stuff to make it happen to a degree. I wonder, speaking of filling up the top of funnel, how do you find, let's say, 600 LP to talk to, and what it's the intricate relationship look like when you're asking someone to introduce their LP to you? Look like?
Well, so we have a few playbooks around this, but I'll talk to you about our LinkedIn playbook. So there are two ways that you can get intros on LinkedIn. You either start with the target. So there are some databases floating around of family offices and high net worths and folks that invest in venture institutions, right? So you can start with a target list. And then I worked with an intern at the time, later an associate, that went through and found all those targets on LinkedIn and listed the common connections, right? You need to go into this with a network. If you have zero network, then first step is to build network. Let's assume you have some network. So that's the first way, you target first, find the connections. The second way is find some targets, based on your key allies. So what we'll do is download my entire network from LinkedIn. I spent a weekend going through it and marking who's a key ally. A key ally is somebody that I have a strong enough relationship with that they would make an introduction. They would take a referral. Not everyone on your LinkedIn network is going to be a key ally, right? So let's say out of 10,000 connections, I had 250 key allies or 100 key allies. I don't remember the number. Then my intern would go through each key ally and look through every connection that they have on LinkedIn, and anyone that looks like, feels like, smells like they could be an LP, we would add to our list. And then, there's a lot of people out there with 10 million plus in net worth, a lot, way more than you think. There's no lack of LP targets. The sea of LP targets is limitless. It's just, your lack of willingness to get after it and find them, really. And so those are the two methods. So, it's as easy as reaching out to these referral partners and saying, hey, I was looking through LinkedIn. There's a few people in your network that we're looking to get in touch with. Do you mind if I send you the list? You ask for permission to send the list before you send the list. Don't just send the list. And then when they say, sure, I'll be happy to look. Then you follow up with the list and say, are you close enough with any of these that you'd be willing to forward a blurb? And it's funny, the nuance of handling these relationships is important. You can't, like I said, you asked to send the list before sending the list. These are things I've gotten wrong. Lots of trial and error. But once you kind of dial it in and you understand kind of the EQ required to ask for these things and who you can go to key allies. You can't just go to anyone. Like Grace, we haven't known each other that long. And so if I were to ask you, hey, can you make introductions to all these people? You might be like, well, I respect Nick and I like Nick, but I don't know him that well. I can't vouch for him. And so, those are the two LinkedIn playbooks that have worked well for us. And that's a machine. I would meet with my intern during fundraising every morning for probably 15 to 20 minutes. And we'd go through the list. Who are we reaching out to next? Who did we not get from that list? I just sent a list to Grace. She made 2 introductions, but we sent her 8. Let's put the other 6 back in the system and recycle them. And every morning, who are we reaching out to today? And you fill the schedule.
Oh my God. You should have AI do it with you. Creating a schedule. Right. And then sending you, hey, here are 3 emails that you need to send. And then there's like their email. So, but I think that's like a really, that requires a lot of hustle and the EQ for the game. Because I feel like, I wonder, so for, let's say like the 250 people, do you have to know them for like 1,000 years? Or like, let's say, you met someone from your podcast and like, how do you kind of like follow up with people to kind of like make sure that they're like happy to help? Because I also heard this on another podcast. You said like, when you first trying to start a fund, maybe like 20 to 30 people like pick up a call to like, basically help you. Right. Mm-hmm. I think like, meeting someone at a conference on a podcast or like, at somewhere random, like that's easy because venture capital industry is kind of like network driven. So everybody meet everybody at some point. But how do you turn that into like a solid relationship? We're not talking just about like, sure, financially you got something from someone. It's more of like, how do you genuinely build a relationship? Or maybe, I guess, from the business angle, do you even require a genuine relationship, or people tend to invest based on your track record, or like if you can make money based on their judgment?
I mean, part of your question is how do you build a genuine relationship? The other part is how do you take a contact and turn them into a key ally, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's 2 questions.
Genuine relationship. I don't think anyone should be in this business if they're not curious, if they're not really interested in people. And if you're curious and interested in people, the types of people you're calling on are very interesting people. They've made some money. They've done interesting things. The majority of my conversations, I am asking questions. And while I'm asking questions, I'm pre-qualifying the person. I'm finding out, what are they interested in? What sectors do they like? What check sizes do they cut? What other asset classes have they invested in? What types of funds are they invested in? Right? So I'm getting all these great talking points, right? I probably have 50 stories in my head of startups I could talk about, strategies I could talk about. And while I'm talking with people, I'm figuring out, oh, they probably want to touch on healthcare. Oh, they really care about the data angle of AI, right? And I've got a story around both those things. So building genuine relationships is really about being curious, about being interested in people, and about asking questions. And if you can't do that and you find yourself not liking that, this is probably not the career for you. That's my first part. The second thing is there's a lot of nuance to the relationship building, but whether I'm trying to convert somebody from a contact to a key ally or a prospect to an LP or an interesting ecosystem player that could be a big gatekeeper for us, I tried to make it simple because you can overcomplicate it. So my streak funnel, my CRM funnel is really meeting 1, meeting 2, meeting 3. So my goal with anyone that can be an asset in my network, whether they're a direct LP or an indirect, is get to meeting 3 and find a creative way to do it, right? You don't want to just jump on Zoom all the time and Zoom is transactional. You got to find a way, take them to lunch, show up in Salt Lake City and say, find a reason to meet with people, engage with people, invite them to something that they'd be interested in. So the way I've simplified it is get people to meeting 3. And by meeting 3, you'll know if they're a key ally or if they're actually interested. You can ask them at that point, we're raising our fund and we'd love to have you be a part of it and see what they say. So that's the way we've simplified.
Do you feel like people invest based on like a vibe game, or do you feel like people invest based on like a data-driven approach? Like, okay, so here's my angel investment. Among my 200 angel investment, 150 raise a fund, like the next round of funding. So you should invest in my fund. That should be like a way to go about it. Or it's like, I'm Nick. I built up this network through my podcast, and I've co-invested with XYZ and blah blah blah. So like, I guess like, which approach do you think it's like more favorable for like earlier stage when you first getting started at the $6 million fund?
For a fund manager. So I can't speak for institutions, and I don't want to,
Yeah.
be negative on institutions.
But none of this are financial advice, by the way. This is like just like for entertainment and education purposes.
No financial advice here. I just think, the further you get away from the person that made the money, the less their incentives are to make money. They have different incentives. So as much as possible, I'm trying to get as close to the person that made money, because it takes one to know one. And when I look in the eye of somebody who's made money, a killer can spot a killer, and they usually convert. So it's just a matter of spending that time, getting to know them. People, I think they say, people make emotional decisions and justify it with data. I think that's true. People want to get to know you. They want to see if there's trust. They want to see if you're ethical. They want to see if you follow through and follow up on the things you said you were going to do, just like I test the startups with that. In people's subconscious, they might not do it consciously, but in their subconscious, they're getting all these signals from you. Is this person strange to interact with? Does this person do what they say? Does this person keep their promises? Do they do interesting things? Are they part of interesting networks, right? As much as I can, I'm trying to move a prospect, through sort of these emotional stages to get to them to the point where they want to be a part of what we're doing. They're chasing me. If you can get LPs to chase you and stop pitching, you've won. And so, we're social beings. People want to be around certain types of people. And when they see you doing something special and you can get them to come to you and ask for a slot. I mean, I have a text message on my phone right now. It's a LP from Fund 1 asking for a slot on Fund 3. I could never have imagined that at Fund 1. This person is asking for a slot. Of course, this person gets a slot, 100%. But just the fact that they're having to ask me at this point, it's a signal that I think, we've done some of the right things and people feel fortunate to be a part of this.
How do you get to the point that people chase you? And what was like the performance of Fund 1 And how do you kind of like have a really quality deal flow for yourself? Is that like, do you go out and chase all the deals? Like, how do you kind of like create a quality deal flow? I think it's easy to create a deal flow, but it's hard to create like a quality deal flow.
Well, we use media. So our top 5 performing startups were listeners to the podcast that reached out to me cold. We have a whole system for processing cold inbound. Most VCs don't. Most VCs are comfortable in their ivory towers at their country clubs, sharing deals with their networks. We get after it. We take cold pitches, and our best performing startups are cold. We also have built a tech platform. If you're familiar with platforms like Harmonic,
Yeah.
it rhymes with that. Actually, we did a little collaboration with them a few years ago because we were doing a lot of the same things. So we have ways that we go out and find startups that nobody knows exists. The majority of the stealth startups we invest in, they don't have many VC connections at the point that we invest. So there's a variety of things we're doing to find deals and create proprietary deal flow. I know a lot of venture firms are trying to do that. It's difficult to do with limited resources. But you're doing something, right? You're hosting these shows, and I'm sure you get a lot of inbound because of it. I know we do. So there's a lot of creative ways to generate deal flow. I'm trying to remember the other part of your question, Grace.
How do you get LP chase you?
Well, you have to kind of take people on a journey with you. So if you're getting, like, let's say you start at familiarity. I was just thinking about this the other day. Somebody's aware of you, right? And then you move from familiarity to, let's say, trust. They have some, they've met with you. There's some trust. They know who you are. From that, you move to respect. And then finally, where you really want to get an LP is to like admiration. Like they feel special just being a part of what you're building. That's a continuum, and not everyone just goes straight from familiarity to admiration, right? But you got to spend time with people. You got to show them what you're all about. You have to provide value to LPs. I've got a good friend who's coming to Chicago in 2 weeks, and he said, "Nick, I'm hosting this dinner. Invite all your LPs." And I said, "John, you can't do that. Like the LPs that you want at the dinner don't want to come to your dinner, right? They feel like they're doing you a favor showing up to your networking dinner. You've got to provide them value. You've got to think outside the box, do something special. Like 3 years ago, I hosted a dinner, and I had the #1 chef in the world come and speak to the group and cook the meal. And he did it for a song. He did it for like a really cheap price because he really believed in our mission, and I pitched him on it. Last year, I had the Wim Hof breathing guy come. Outside the box, totally different. Everyone wants to do a panel of startup founders or, so-and-so launched this great startup, That's what every conference is. You have to kind of counter position, do something different. People freaked out with this Wim Hof thing. Like it opens you up. You have kind of this out-of-body experience. People loved it. This year, I just hosted a really nice event last week, and it was we had the world's foremost bourbon expert come in and talk about bourbon, and people geeked out. Like I didn't know who this guy was, but a lot of people knew who he was. Like he's a famous guy. And so there's ways that you can do things that, these really, really wealthy people can't do themselves. How do you provide something unique? How do you provide an experience? How do you host something that people want to be a part of, that they're excited about? And those are all things that can be done. So I think fundamentally it's about spending time with a person, right? Get to that third meeting, spend time, show that you're interested, ask them questions, figure out ways that you can help them before you ask for anything. I never want to have my hand out when I meet somebody for the first time, right? I'm on the road this week. I was on the road last week. We're not even in market. We won't be in market till Q3. But I'm always meeting people, especially before I ask for money. And there are opportunities to show people like they want to be close to you. They want to be around you. It's not just about track record and performance. Obviously, they're going to justify their decision with that. And they love that. They look at the way that we operate and the deals we've done, and it provides a lot of signal. But they're not making decisions just based on our track record.
I love that. I think like I've heard that I think there's like a challenge of like being a podcast host to like be an interesting person, because I think got the feedback of like I talk too little. Like I'm very interested in other people, but like I don't really like showcase myself or whatever. But I feel like it's really difficult because a part of it is like being like, hosting a podcast is like your major job is like listening and asking something and listening, right? So it's really hard to be like, I don't want to insert myself while the guest was talking or like interrupt them or like just like basically just like block their train of thoughts to a degree. Want to be respectful, but it's also hard to demonstrate you're like an interesting person to the universe. Technically, I personally found the podcast hosts or like the media personalities are literally some of the most interesting people in the world because of they've kind of like programmed their mind by listening to all these like amazing other people on their show, right? So I wonder what's your thought on like being interesting versus being interested?
How do you try and flip the script and like contribute on your shows?
God, I'm still learning. So I think it really depends on the guest's vibe. Like if the guest is like more of like a conversational guest, then I would, or like if I'm like super close friends with the guest, like yes, I would flip the script to like share something. But if like the guest is like more of like someone I really admire, who are like someone I look up to like yourself, like, or like just people that are like um you know I'm like not like on a daily basis like chatting with, or like I feel like I'm more of like I want to be respectful to the person and then like actually hearing their opinion first. So that's my style, but like I want to know like what's your style. I mean, I listen to your show, so like I don't really know how to articulate it, but like I feel like I also wanted to learn from you on like how you kind of inject yourself into the conversation too, or like being an interesting person for the people who are, getting to the third meeting basically.
I get what you're saying, and I agree. I think the primary function of the podcast host is to listen and listen well. Two very famous podcasters in our space are much more talkers than they are listeners. We take a different approach. We're more of listeners. But you did something before that was great. You said, Nick, in my experience, I've had a tough time, interjecting my own comments. And so you flipped it and you told a story about yourself. And then you asked for my opinion on it. That's one tactic I've used that you just used, very gracefully, Grace. No pun intended.
Thank you.
And I would do more of that. And the other thing that I learned, it took me probably 5 years to do this because I clearly had imposter syndrome. I never founded a startup, big tech startup. I never worked for a venture firm. I was some no-name guy from Chicago that was trying to build a venture firm and a 10x plus, best alpha performing venture fund. And so I had terrible imposter syndrome for the first 5 years. And it took me a long time to learn the words, I disagree. And sometimes somebody says something on the show and I say, I disagree. Here's what I think. And I don't do that very often, but it makes for interesting conversation. And so I would use the tactic you're already using, and I would learn to disagree sometimes. That's okay.
I love that. I feel like, dude, it's hard. Like, I think it's like, I really think you have accomplished something that's like very hard, because I think being in Silicon Valley or like living here, I think it's such a pedigree driven society. And it's like very hard for people to without like the right background, as you mentioned, like to kind of like stand up on the crowd in the tech ecosystem. And yeah, to be honest, like looking at the top podcasting like people who started the from like yourself, you're from Chicago, and Harry Stepping is from like England. Literally everybody is like not living in Silicon Valley. That's something that like it's like very interesting to look at because I think it's such a, I don't know, like I feel like I don't really know how to like, again, like I'm like very bad at articulation sometimes when there's like overwhelming amount of thoughts in my brain right now. So I just feel like it's really, to a degree, it's like ironic that like, you know, people in Silicon Valley are maybe like fitting into a pattern and then people are competing into the same game versus like people outside looking in like very easily spot something that's missing.
I couldn't agree more. Being outside of the echo chamber is a
Yeah.
huge advantage. Also, the gates to get into venture are not the skills to have success in venture. So most of the people that are in venture are really good optimizers. They're really good at school. They're really good at getting into the Ivy Leagues, right? They know how to optimize. Many venture capitalists don't know how to think different. That's why it's such a herd industry, right? You see these momentum rounds and velocity rounds, and the good news is that's an opportunity for people that do think differently. You know, if you get people that are true contrarians in the industry that do stuff like this, you know, launch a live podcast. I told my wife this morning, I'm on a podcast today. Or she was like, why are you wearing that shirt? I'm like, well, because I want to represent fair market. You know, I love these guys. They just had a big win. And I'm on this podcast, and she asked, you know, about you. And I said, and it's a live show. I've never done a live show. And I don't think my wife has listened to a podcast in probably 8 years. She said, let me know what time it is. I'll tune in.
Oh my God.
You're doing something unique. Like the fact that it's live, people want to tune in. It's unique. So yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of opportunity for people that think different to have a lot of success in venture. And, you know, I give you a lot of credit for doing it.
Thank you. I want to say hi to the audience. Hi, Ariel. Hi, Candice. So I wanted to ask you, like, if you're living in Silicon Valley, what are things that you feel like people are not doing that they should be doing?
If you're living in Silicon Valley?
If you are living in Silicon Valley.
If I was living in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. And like, if you are like, so someone trying to start a fund nowadays, like, because a lot of the listeners are emerging managers, even emerging LPs. So I don't know if you're familiar. That's a thing now. So like, I wonder what would you do to like make yourself stand out?
Yeah, again, like before we talked about how every new fund has a thesis. Obviously, we have to start with a thesis. What are you going to invest in? Much, much more important to take the next step and have a strategy. How are you going to build a sustainable, unique, competitive advantage over time? Most VCs can't answer that question. So that's what I would suggest. And then think about the 3 pillars of deal flow: sourcing, selection, and winning. I think the winners of the future are going to have unique value propositions and unique strategies around each, strategies and tactics. How do you outsource in your area? You know, how do you source better than anyone else? Or how do you do it in a unique way that's going to make sure you get eyes on really good stuff before others? You know, how are you going to outpick everyone else? Like that's something we've started building automation around. We started with sourcing. We have a lot of automation and systems and media around that. Now we're building a lot around selection. Like, how do we take all these insights and things we're looking for and build unique selection? Very few have done it well. Universities are very poor pickers of students. Companies are very poor pickers of talent. Even the Navy SEALs. I had Larson Jensen on, as I mentioned last week. He said the Navy SEALs, despite all their efforts to pick people that are going to survive buds, the percentage that get through buds has remained the same, despite their learnings over time. In general, people are really good at picking for their desired outcome when it comes to talent. So we're trying to innovate there. And then finally, winning deals. Like if you're going head to head, we lead everything we do. Every deal we do, we lead, which means we compete, which means founders have to pick us. And we win over 90% of our deals. It may be like over 92%. I'd have to look at the data. We win the lion's share of the deals we offer against our competitors for a reason. And we're going to have to continue to innovate on that to make sure that we are chosen in the future.
Amazing. Okay. I want to end with like a 1-minute fire round. I don't know if you have a minute.
Let's go.
What's your favorite book?
Made in America.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
My wife.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to a dinner party?
Yeah.
If we could invite people that have passed away, John D. Rockefeller.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Hosting an event or traveling somewhere for venture. I'm obsessed with venture, so it's most of what I do. Or just, with my family, with my son.
Amazing. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Grace, you are the best. Best of luck to you, and thanks so much for being such a gracious host.
Let me quickly